That's cool. Welcome to Still Talking Uncut. Sorry we're a little late. We're having some technical difficulties on the other end. But anyways, I'm your host, Big Easy, joined by my co-host, Master Distiller Sean Rigsby. Our plan is to have Moonshiner Jerry Benson on. He's having a little technical difficulties at the moment, so we're gonna play it
Yeah,
slow and he'll get in here eventually.
I
So
think his IT is stuck up there in New York or something. I'm not real sure what's going on with that.
you'll have that. Like I didn't, I didn't think we was gonna find anybody with less technical capabilities than Sean, but it is what it is. So, you know. Anyways,
Oh man,
I can imagine your messages over there. It's probably cussing you.
yeah, yep. Tater,
That's
it's 10:05.
fine.
Where you at, bitch?
Yeah, I'm getting that too. Like where you guys at? Like, oh man, we're waiting. Like so.
Oh no,
Hopefully, maybe he'll figure it out. If not, then I guess we'll just roll on and try
reschedule.
try again next week. I don't know, but how's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? We're waiting on Jerry, Moonshiner Jerry's. He's getting it rolling. He's having an issue with our StreamYard in Google Chrome for some reason. It could be a pain. So,
Yeah, it's got something to do with that Tennessee, if I had to guess.
and I think
North Carolina area.
Sean lied about who was going to be on the show tonight just to get people to tune in. That's what happened. So you're April Fools. Sean lied to everybody.
Incorrect. I got proof right here.
It's just he and I. Don't let him mess with you. Damn it, Sean. Oh, I blame Sean. That's what I do anyways. So, well, anyways, I guess while we're waiting on Jerry to join, hopefully he gets in. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. Hope everybody ate way too much and enjoyed the family. And what'd you do for Thanksgiving, Sean?
What I do or eat?
A little bit of both.
I didn't really do much, and we had steak instead of Thanksgiving dinner.
And you never go wrong with steak, man. I usually do steak on Christmas.
Oh yeah, yep. Steak, ham, potatoes. It don't matter. It's all good food. All goes
Don't
down, comes
matter.
out same way.
That's right. Y'all cook at home or y'all go to family?
Oh no, we all cook. We cooked here.
Nice.
Yep.
It's
Oh wait.
hold on, maybe my man. Welcome, Andy.
Now see, you didn't make me out of a liar, man. I thought for sure.
Welcome to the show, Jerry. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, guys. I'm sorry I don't have all them fancy headphones and stuff.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
good. Are you good? Are you using your phone?
No, I'm using a tablet.
All right, cool. It's always
Yeah,
nice
left
to
on.
see somebody other than Sean. So
Well, next time you got to have your people from New York come down help you out.
Yeah, so I got my person though.
Tell her thank you.
sometimes you got to call in the better help. Like if I had a question, I'd be yelling for my son to come in here. Like, bro, what do you fix this for me? So, you gotta have a go-to. There's always a go-to person with technology. Every house needs one.
I guess the biggest problem I had was I wasn't signed into my Google. Once we got signed into my Google account, it actually link right on.
Interesting, because I remember when I first downloaded this, it said something about it didn't work with whatever it comes with the Apple stuff, Safari. So I downloaded that, Google Chrome. But the hell was I going to say? Anyway, you go ahead and introduce him. Everybody already knows. But
quit talking, Sean, man. All right, we finally got a real celebrity on here instead of Sean, pretend celebrity. Get off the show, Sean.
Hey, sorry, Hollywood. Hollywood has arrived.
Let me introduce our guest. Welcome to the show, Moonshiner Jerry from Discovery Channel Moonshiners. It's a master distiller. Honored to have you on here.
Pleasure.
This is, it took a while, but I guess it's worth the wait.
Oh, absolutely.
So we always start off with, what are you drinking on? So you drinking on anything special over there, Jerry? Or is it a Sunday night, take it easy night, Monday morning comes early?
Yeah, it's kind of a Sunday night. Just having a little Sierra Mist right now.
Ginger ale.
Ginger ale.
Production in the back, gotcha.
Yep.
This is uncut, man. Everything that's said stays on here, so say what you mean and mean what you say. We're not going to cut anything out. So,
all right, good.
If you don't want to answer something, just say next question, and we'll go.
All right.
We'll Sean's got a list over there. I'm just going to play it off the top of my head. Maybe Sean will learn a thing or two.
Sean always learns a thing or two. That's the best part about this shit.
So, what are you drinking on, Sean?
The best alcohol money can buy. From Tennessee and North Carolina.
Where'd you get those at? Where'd you get those at?
North Carolina.
So those were the ones that were in my barn. And how'd you get them? Oh, I brought them to you. You're such a piece of shit.
Well, hold on a minute. Bennett. Mr. Bennett. Brung them up.
Yeah, and they sat in my barn for a month until I took them over to him.
Well,
I drank a few, so there's a few less. So, speaking of Bennett, I'm drinking on some of Bennett's bourbon. So,
well, you're drinking good tonight, then, aren't you?
We'll reserve that for afterwards. We can't give them too many compliments. You gotta just toss them out a little here or there.
Oh yeah.
Don't want to get his head too big. So
Jerry, go ahead.
No, I didn't know if there's any way if you could see comments, or y'all are seeing the comments, or
yeah, we see the comments. We just we ignore them because it draws away from the show.
I didn't see.
But if you see one and you want to respond to it, feel free.
Oh, I can't see anything, so right.
Get your glasses out.
Yeah, if I could only find them, I would.
No, he's probably in full screen mode. But so yeah, man, just tell us a little bit about if moonshine was in your history, or
when did you start? When did you get started? Did you have any family history that you fell off of?
I got started about say around 15 years ago. It was kind of one of the things that I knew there was a lot of heritage in my family for it, but I just didn't really know what it was. And that was kind of the sad thing is, I found out with a lot of other families that there's like this generational jump. Like, say, my dad's generation, along with a lot of other people my age, their parents kind of jumped. It kind of jumped with them because they didn't want to, because their parents kind of hid it from them just to keep them out of trouble. And then they didn't learn any of it. So, they didn't really get into it to stay out of trouble as well. And then, of course, there's a select few that did get involved with it and has kept it up. Basically like Tim Smith, it followed him all the way down through the families, But like myself, my dad's dad was a big time bootlegger all over, Hendersonville, South Carolina area. And then my mom's dad, he was actually a actual steel hand / moonshiner himself / bootlegger. And both my grandparents actually done time for it. So therefore, like I didn't, my dad didn't really get a lot of it. So therefore it wasn't passed down to me. So I'm just kind of slowly finding out through my family, what my history was and all that. But I know it's in my blood. It's first time I done it, it was I was hooked. Wasn't no going back then.
It only takes once. It doesn't matter if you're falling back on heritage that you know about, or if you're just some guy who picked it up, man. as soon as it gets in that blood, one drop in your blood is all it takes. And,
Oh yeah, it's like as soon as you put a still together and you put a mash bill together and you fire it up and that first drop comes out the money spout, it's your hook, line, and sinker. Then ain't no going back.
you can't. it's better than any drug.
Oh yeah.
It's something about it just gives you a satisfaction, And,
Oh, absolutely.
So what was the first thing you ever ran? First size still, first mash?
Well, for years I ran a 10-gallon pot. That was 10-gallon pot was my first one. I went from a 10-gallon to a 5-gallon just because I wanted to start trying some different things.
Keep your costs down. Makes sense.
Yeah, because I was actually doing a lot of my mash. I was doing 5-gallon buckets, so therefore it didn't really make a lot of sense to do a lot of 10-gallon pots when I was mashing everything in 5 gallons. 5 and 7-gallon buckets. So I kind of went backwards to a 5-gallon, learn a lot more about it and kind of what I wanted to do, and then I went back up to a 10. I ran a 10 for years, and then slowly started kind of going up to 50, 100. Kind of about. I tell you, I always go back if I need something really special, or if I'm doing something really special, or if I'm looking for that certain taste profile. It's no doubt I always go back to my 10-gallon pot. I feel like that's good. I tell everybody too, people who don't know what they want, I ask them what they're doing, what they want to accomplish, and then I try to help them decide what size they want. And 9 times out of 10, people always, end up going back to that 10-gallon pot.
Hell yeah!
Great to experiment on, and small batch. There's a reason why you go into a store and small batch bottle costs so much more than a large batch. It's just
absolutely.
I think that small batch is just got a little bit more love to it, a little more care to it, and it's going to be better in the end,
Well, for those who are that want to get into it, but they don't know that they have a lot of time, or they don't really know how to do things quite yet, so they don't know how much time they got to dedicate to it. 10-gallon, that's one of the good things about it. You can fire up, you can run a good run and not be pushed, and you can do it in 4.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And your mistakes aren't real expensive.
Exactly.
Your mistakes and your learning, they're not real expensive unless you go all out.
Yeah.
You go all out on your mash with high.
But the good thing about it is, if you do end up doing everything right and you actually get a good run out of it, you actually get a decent enough quantity out of it to where you felt like you're accomplished. You get more than a pint out of it or a quart.
You got something.
You get up there closer to like a gallon. Depending on what you're doing or how you make your cuts.
Yeah, that's one thing I never understood. Is people run a beer keg and they'll be like, "Oh, I ran it for 14 hours," and I'm like, "No." Me personally, I would never do that. But I mean, if you don't know, you don't know.
I tell you, that's the biggest problem with a lot of people that I've talked to. They just get online, they look up things, and they for some odd reason, this whole drip pause has really got everybody confused as to how you're actually supposed to run. You need a full stream, coming out of there. Like old Popcorn, and sometimes I hate referring back to it, but he said it the best. If it's bigger than a matchstick, you're running it too hard. Almost any steel, whether it be a 10-gallon pot, or a 150-gallon pot. I mean, really about a toothpick size stream is about where you need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Pencil head.
Pretty much, yeah, basically.
So, what's your favorite thing to run for yourself?
Well, because I've always been known so much for doing flavored stuff. It's basically I just do a sugar liquor, and that's kind of another big thing that really confuses everybody. I think that most people think that if you're not running some kind of barley or corn or whatever, you're not making real moonshine. But what people don't really realize is alcohol comes from sugar. So I mean,
it's all out. It's alcohol at the end, man. If it'll get me drunk, then you did a good job. You did it right. Got me drunk. I didn't have a hangover from it. You did a great job. You made liquor. You made moonshine.
But basically, a whitewash is kind of what I primarily stick to a lot, just because I experiment so there's so many different flavors. And it's kind of hard to take anything else, a corn or anything.
Yeah.
Because it takes so much to cover it up and actually get a good balanced flavor without the aftertaste or whatever. So, I tell everybody I make a rum vodka is what I make. So
Rum vodka, nice.
comes off pretty high, and it's no taste, no flavor to it whatsoever, and it's easy to flavor that way.
So are you a one run and done type person, or do you run thumpers? Do you rerun your product to get a higher proof, or what's your?
Well, here's where I am with all that, and everybody has their own opinion of what all that actually means. For years I'd done stripping runs and I'd done spirit runs, and basically it wasn't for necessarily the high proof, but in my eyes, basically high proof means clean alcohol. Because if you're pumping out 180 to 185 proof alcohol, you've got some really good, clean, flavorless alcohol. You don't have much water in it, so there can't be much flavor in it. So then you got the chance to be able to put your own water back into it, temper it down to a good mixing proof, and then add your flavor to it.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And it's not, as far as what I do, if I'm doing something, years ago, I used to run my little 10-gallon pot, as I was saying. I actually used an 8-jar rig, which, what really first got me intrigued in what I was doing with the jars. I've been running jars for years. I guess I started with a little two-jar rig, probably about 12 years ago. And then I got talking to Gibbs one day, Gibson. And
to be clear, we're talking about Sean's dad now.
Exactly.
The godfather of mason jars, Rick Gibson.
That's right.
Sean's pop.
And so I was talking to him, kind of telling him what I had done and what I was looking to do. And he kind of threw a few pointers out there to me. And next thing I know, I built this rack system with 8 jars in it. And it's only like a foot, maybe 14 inches square. And it houses 8 jars, 4 down low, 4 up high. And then kind of experimented with different things. And one of the things I found out worked the best for me and my situation, the way I was doing it, is I actually took Crown oil bags and bagged all my jars. And, man, it made a world of difference. So I could go from my pot, 10-gallon pot, through the jars, straight from mash to my condenser. And I was putting out about 181 proof, through that jar rig. And I was getting, out of a 10-gallon run, I'd get about 5 liters, and it was running the same from start to finish.
Just drop off real quick when it did, probably.
Yeah, pretty much. What I would do is I had mine, me being a little bit more scientific, electric kind of guru. I had a lot of electronic, thermometers hooked to it, and my water was all controlled by electronics. So what would happen was whenever it would start dropping to about 170 proof, I would actually change over my jars, but I would actually keep collecting down to probably around 100, 110 proof, and by that time it was getting really, the pot was starting to get pretty hot. But I would get that first 5 liters off, and it was like they ran from 180, 181, solid like that. But then once it got into that 5 liters, you got to start seeing around 178 proof. And then, I didn't really want to take a chance and, having a lot of smearing problems. So, once it started to drop, I'd always change over. And that always happened around 178, 179 proof.
That's fucking crazy.
Now on that jar rig you're talking about, you had a high jar, low jar, high jar, low jar.
Mm-hmm.
And it did because I've seen some pictures of, I call it the high low rig. And was that inspiration for your later on the big one?
Are you talking about the one on the we done on the show?
No.
Didn't you? Was that the one you were So you ran that one on the small one, not the bigger pot?
Yeah, that's my little 10-gallon pot that I used to run.
Okay.
Okay, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you like how it worked with the high jar and the low jar?
Oh yeah, like I say, you could actually watch it sit there and cry. I mean, you knew it was doing its job, and so I would actually for the longest time I would actually insulate the actual incoming pipe, but I would actually let the outgoing, the actual vapor tube, outgoing pipe to the next jar. I'd actually leave it exposed to the ambient temperature, just so that it would cry, because I wanted that, pretty much that reflux to be able, strip that alcohol down and bring it up at higher proof. But the thing about it is, if you didn't have it running at the right speed, those jars would fill up like super quick. And so you always had to keep that thing regulated where, once you got it, of course, after a period of time of running it, you actually learn where that speed needs to be. And then, of course, then runs, pretty similar. But one of the things that I found out that there's a big necessity of those jars. And this is something that most people have to figure out pretty much on their own, how that actually works. But my first jar and my third jar always had to have liquid in it to start. If it didn't, those jars would never fill up right. They would always overflow, or overfill. One would be real full, one would be empty. I mean, I started to run and had the next to the last jar be empty, would have nothing in it. And then I've had my fifth or sixth jar would be almost slam full, But by putting a little bit of liquid, about 8 ounces in the first jar and the second jar, every one of the jars would regulate and fill up the exact same.
Interesting.
I imagine that's different on everybody's rig. So that's something that you learn just from running your rig. Like yours is like that. Somebody else's might be, oh, I got to put a little bit in the middle jar.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like say everybody, depending on what you're burning, whether you're burning on, if you're running on electric, if you're running on propane. And actually, I found that burners make a big difference. I know a lot of people, even Mike, Mike is just dead set. He wants to run everything on those jet burners. I really don't like them, simply because they're really they're really heat sensitive. I mean, if you got anything in a pot, you can scorch it with those jet burners, just because they concentrate heat in such a small spot. Now, yes, if you put a big thing on there and you want to heat it up quick, it'll do it. But you take a chance of having those scorch spots. Me myself, it depends on what pot I'm actually running, but I like banjo burners. It's got all the little small flames on it. If you're familiar with what I'm talking about, it's basically a cast iron, and it's got say a 12 or 14 inch burner. It's probably got 50, 75 little holes in it.
Yeah.
And then the flames don't get much bigger than a cigarette lighter, but they get super hot, and you can control the heat a lot better with them.
Yeah, a lot more heat distribution.
Yeah.
Not that one spot, just cooking it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I'm real big on that too. So I really like to really think about all the scenarios and the issues beforehand. It's like I'm doing something. That's why if I am using a jet burner, I actually like to fire it into a plate. So a lot of times when I build a jet burner for somebody that's really wanting it, I'll always put, like I say, a 1/4 inch plate, maybe 8 inches in diameter, right below the pot, so that jet burner is actually firing into that plate, getting that plate hot, and then it actually still can transfer the radiant heat onto there. Plus everything that plumes out around it is kind of distributing that heat, that flame outward.
Evenly. Yeah.
I've seen people do that, run off just wood right underneath wood fires. They put a plate under there to help regulate it and distribute it to help not burn the bottom out of their still or scorch their mash.
So do you
Get you a plate, Sean.
infusion or anything like that?
What's that?
Do you do a lot of infusion, or is that do you just use the jars as basically thumpers to raise the proof a little bit?
No, I have found that's the jar rig is actually it's almost more of a filter rather than an infuser. It's designed to strip out any impurities or whatever, rather than put flavor in. I have built jar rigs for myself if I'm doing something where I can actually cut jars off, where I can infuse some flavor. but it's like, I have like, say, I think I've got like a 3-jar rig, but each one's got valves on them where I can load all 3 of them up with a flavor. I can start running with a crossover pipe. Once it gets to running, I can drop back to 1 jar, let it run that way for a little while. Because, with anything, just like you put potatoes in a pot and start boiling them, it ain't going to take very long. They're going to break down, and the next thing you know, all that flavor is going to be in the liquid. If you're seeing all that liquid through, it ain't going to take long before apples or peaches or grapes, whatever, are just going to practically be mush with no flavor left in it. So you have to keep changing. You might get a quart or 2 out of 1 jar, and then when you switch over to the next jar, you might get a quart or 2 more out of it. But you're only going to get out of, say, that 3-jar rig. I'm only going to probably go and get a good gallon and a half that's actually going to have good flavor to it.
Oh yeah. So, do you like, as far as condensers go, are you a worm guy? You a shotgun condenser kind of guy, a Liebig, or?
Well, I'm really big on worm condensers, but they've got to be sized accordingly. I see a lot of these steel companies building, 10, 15, 20 gallon pots and putting straws for condensers in a soup. It just drives me crazy to see that kind of stuff.
It's too small.
Then people actually have a lot of problems. They have issues. They can't figure out what they're doing wrong, but they don't really realize it's, their condenser. They're not really getting, actually, basically the rule of thumb I tell everybody is about 10% of your pot is what you should be getting out of, it. And of course, it depends on what proof it's coming off. So if you're at 10%, you're running a 20-gallon pot. Rule of thumb is you should be running two good gallons off there. But now if you're running that 2 good gallons, if you're running that pot and you're only getting, like, say, 120, 130 proof because you have no doublers or anything, you may get closer to 3.5, maybe even 4 gallons out of it because you are bringing it off the lower proof. That 2 gallon, 10% is actually the rule of thumb is like, that's be 200 proof alcohol, a real high proof alcohol, 2 gallons. So if you got to do the math on it, then that's one thing. But a lot of the problem is people, be running a 20-gallon pot and they'll pull off, a gallon and a half and think they've really done something until they realize that their condenser has let a lot of their alcohol escape from them because it wasn't enough to condense all the alcohol. Now, my personal preference is a gallon condenser. Just basically a larger cylinder, multiple tubes in a vertical position inside of a water jacket. I feel like that is a much better condenser, but again, they have to be sized accordingly. Years ago, I had one that I built for that 10-gallon pot that works absolutely perfect. But you hook it to a 50-gallon pot like I did one time, and I was getting nowhere near the amount of alcohol off of that I should be getting, and was confused and really couldn't figure out why until I realized that the condenser was actually, I'd have like little puffs of smoke coming out of the condenser, not really realizing that was my alcohol I was actually losing. It was just cold alcohol vapor that would come out of it. So again, it's got to be size dependent.
Oh yeah.
But if you've got a big enough worm condenser, I guess a worm condenser is a big go-to for a lot of people. It's definitely a lot cheaper than what like the gallon gun condenser would be. But basically, I don't build a steel from the 5 to the 20 or 25 gallon size that I don't build a 55 gallon 3/4 25 foot long condenser for.
That'd be like putting 60 foot of 1 1/8 on a 100-gallon still. That might be a bit much, Sean.
But, I have to disagree with you. I don't believe that in a condenser such thing is too much.
All right, you heard it there. It's all going in. I was trying to give Sean shit.
If you've got the way of keeping it cool, then by all means. If you got an 1-inch pipe and 100 foot of it, put it in a tank and run a 10-gallon pot on it. I guarantee you it'll all condense.
You got a water tote, don't you, Sean? Don't you got one of the big water totes? Had a big water tote. So while we're talking about building stills, when did you build your first still?
Oh, back when I first started, my very first still I built from scratch. And back then, I didn't know who to talk to, who I could talk to, who I shouldn't talk to.
You shouldn't talk to nobody. That's
Yeah.
what it was. You shouldn't talk to nobody. You
Believe it
shouldn't
or
tell
not,
nobody. You
believe it
shouldn't
or
ask
not,
questions.
the first person I ever talked shop to, believe it or not, was Tim Smith. He was my very first person I really got to talk shop with. And of course, I've been watching the show for years and kind of following everybody. Well, come to find out, my daughter told me one day that Tim Smith was in town, and I said we got to find him. And we found him. His thing was from 2 o'clock, I think 2 o'clock to 4:30, I think. And we got there at exactly 4:30, and he stood there and talked to me till almost 6:30. Just me and him standing there talking shop. And one of the things he told me, and it stuck with me for years, and it still does, and I try to pass it along to everybody. He said the most important thing about running liquor is slow and cold. And so, it took me a while to really realize exactly what he meant by that. And once you really grasp that saying, slow and cold, it really makes a difference in what you're doing. If you can't run that, you got to keep that pot running at a slower pace. You can't push it too hard because there's a lot of things that happen. You if you get the pot too hot and you try to put it under too much pressure, of course, you're stressing the run really hard. And if you're not keeping that condenser super super cool, then you're losing alcohol. So slow and cold is the biggest secret there is to it.
Interesting. So was he? So are you from North Carolina?
Mm-hmm.
Or okay.
Yeah, I'm
Now,
actually from the Hendersonville, Asheville area where I was born and raised. And then I
okay,
moved over to Maggie Valley about 2 years ago.
nice. So do you have a name for your still company, or is it just kind of like by ear?
No, it's going to be, we're still trying to get everything worked out and pretty much got everything approved. The mayor and everything else. It's going to be the Maggie Valley Steel Company, home of
Nice.
Moonshiner Jerry. Is what we're going to do.
Hey, don't
So,
blame you.
but to answer your question, the very first pot, that I built was kind of one of them things that I had to, I didn't really know where to get my pieces and parts from, so I'm scavenging, a little piece of copper here, a little piece of copper there, and I just didn't go run buy a full sheet of copper because then I really didn't know what the whole thing was. But I had a buddy that was he was in roofing, and he had got some copper to do some kind of special flashing around something. This
Yeah,
one.
he's either valleys or step flashing up the side.
And so he had a pretty good little piece left over, and I ended up calling him out of it, and that's kind of what I built my first little pot with.
That's
So
cool.
what was your biggest challenge with that, as far as learning to build the all copper pots? Was it not necessarily the building part, but like as a whole, like
Besides
as
not
far
having somebody to ask and
well, as far as efficiency goes, like how did you know how big to build the arm for say a 10-gallon pot? Was that something that you did and you learned as you learned to run it yourself, or
Well, I honestly, when I first built it, I really didn't know. Of course, you always see these, the whole cartoons, and you see the pictures, as far as like the shows, different kinds of shows and stuff. You see them in books, and to me, everything's more about symmetrics, and the cap shouldn't look bigger than the pot, and it needs to have a
Mhm.
decent taper, but it needs to be tapered enough where it can slide down in the collar and be able to have a swedge fit. And so pretty much the very first one I ever done, it was kind of more of just kind of a by eye thing. And with me being a fabricator, I've been a fabricator pretty much all my life. When I was about 21, 2 years old, I went and got my welding degree, and I learned all the processes. The TIG, the MIG, the stick, the acetylene welding. I learned all those processes. So building something like that wasn't a big deal. The soldering was, that was a piece of cake. The very first one I ever done, I actually silver soldered the pot together. And that was a bit of a challenge because, silver solder has to get so much hotter than regular tin solder. So keep from burning up the copper and, making a mess of everything. That was a big challenge. But over through the years, you just kind of learn different ways and different things you want to do, and what works a little bit better. Now, me, I am a very big tapered arm guy. I will not use a piece of pipe. I don't like it. I think it looks kind of gaudy. There is no strength to it. So I'm a very big tapered arm person. And one of the things I really theoretically think about all the time tapered arm is anything that condenses in that arm, such as your water thing, I want it to go back to the pot. I don't want it to continue forward. And with a piece of pipe, most time when people put a piece of pipe on there, 9 times out of 10, it's going to actually point and kind of slope down here usually. So anything that condenses in this pipe, it's going on to the condenser or your jars or whatever. But if you've got a combed arm being tapered, anything that condenses in that arm, it's going back into the pot. And plus, it's just much stronger too. You're a bigger area on the cap that you're actually tied to, so you're actually in a better circle.
It's more like a cone. So it's got a lot more rigidity and it's a lot stronger than just a half-inch pipe running across there. So
yeah, and
a lot of people. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say a lot of people who take they use a 3/4 or 1-inch piece of copper pipe, and they'll just drill a hole in it and solder to it. So there's no rigidity on that 16 or 20-ounce material. It's just not very strong.
Mm-hmm. So what is your, since I know you build stills, as far as running them yourself, do you prefer like a paste cap or a tri-clamp or?
Oh, tri-clamp.
What and why?
What?
I said what
simple.
and why.
Keep it simple, man. We had a tri-clamp on there. Bang, bang. Let's go. We're done.
Tri-clamp, it kind of speaks for itself. One, it's guaranteed pretty much to seal every time. And two, it's a lot safer. So if something were to happen, you're not going to have a chance of a cap blowing off. I've been there. I've done that. When I first got started, I thought that the pasting in part was the coolest thing in the world. Here I'm getting ready to make a run. I'm getting ready to paste in, and it's just like it's things that just goes along with the old school ways of doing things.
It makes you feel like you're in Prohibition out there. Prohibition times, pasting that still up, and it's different, man.
And I feel like everybody that does this hobby should at least run a paste cap one time.
Oh, absolutely.
It's awesome.
The thing about it is, though, for those, especially being there and have done that before and seeing all the dangers involved in it, it's almost like letting your kid play on the road. I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I used to get out on the road, and me and my cousin would watch for cars and get out there and throw a baseball or a football out in the middle of the road, or we get out and ride our bikes. But do we want to let our kids play out on the road?
I've been hit a few times by cars, so it's like I've been hit myself. I've had some close calls with that pace. Still, I don't know if I want my own. You're right; it makes a lot of sense.
Yes, especially the people new coming into it. You almost want to teach them the better ways of doing things, and like I say, I don't discredit it, and nothing I ever say or do, or have I ever tried to ever discredit the old school ways of doing things. I love it. I'm thankful for it. If we didn't have it the way it was, we wouldn't be where we are today. We wouldn't have learned all the things that we learned due to that. But it's one of those things that you almost want to. It's kind of like my dad said. I always want you to have better than I had when I was growing up.
And it's just like people aren't taking Wright Flyer Bs to Florida on the weekends. They're not riding in the old Wright Flyer. They're riding in big giant planes and jets now. So
Oh, absolutely.
It's the advancements. It's just how it goes. We get smarter and things get easier and we have more at our fingertips to help us. So we have things that
that's just about with anything that if you look back and think about anything that was done old school versus new school, just think about like log cabins. They were all like hand hewed logs. They were real. It took real men to build those cabins. Now I'm not saying that the guys today aren't real men, but if you got pre-cut lumber that's perfect size, every bit of it's always the same. You got screws instead of nails, instead of pins.
And they got 3D printed houses.
Oh my gosh!
They'll print you a house. Bring a machine out and print you a house out of concrete. It's
top
insanity.
saws and just the tools of today are so much more advanced than what they had. I guarantee you, a man, if you could talk to a man from 100 years ago building a house and give him a skill saw, battery powered skill saw, I guarantee he could never pick up another handsaw in his life.
Never.
Because it's just, that's all they had to work with back then. So that's what they had to use. I mean, it was just the norm. Today, you go to a mechanic shop, 9 times out of 10, when he goes to take a tire off, he ain't going to drag no hose over there and hook up no air gun. He's going to go over and grab his DeWalt or his Milwaukee cordless impact and go over and buzz the tires off.
Yeah. I could ride a bicycle to work every day, but there ain't no way in hell I'm riding a bicycle to work every day.
Exactly.
There's a reason why I got some horsepower,
Yeah.
It's the advancement, man. It's just the way it goes.
And that's like when I started, I didn't know anything. I still don't know anything.
I was going to say,
what you say anything?
Nothing's changed.
Well, my thought process was, if I'm going to do something that everybody says is dangerous to begin with, why would I not buy something that I can clamp it together?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. At the time, I didn't know anything about pasting. I didn't know nothing. I'm just like, well, fuck, I'll be as safe as possible doing something that's not safe.
Especially if you're doing it in your garage. I gotta live here at the end of the day. Gotta be able to go to bed.
Right.
And that's the thing too, it's like I'm doing a lot of smaller steels. But now I'm doing a lot more of the electrical stuff. To me, that's just hands down the smartest way of even doing it. Because
no flash
economically, it works out to where it's actually better in the long run. You don't have to buy the gas. You don't have to smell all that. You don't have to. You just don't have to worry about all the dangers of what gas provides. Whether you're doing it in your basement or your barn out back or whatever, especially with the way the electronic PID controls and stuff are now, you can actually set it before you go to work. When you come home, it's within 15, 20 minutes of actually starting to run. Yeah. You just crank up the juice a little bit, and you're off to the races. It gives you more time to spend with the family. Like I know, with myself, I know, I can look back and I took a lot of time away from the family, sitting out in the building, for hours and hours and hours, waiting on stuff to heat up. But, and it, one of the things that I can't say that I regret it, but I do, as far as that aspect of it. Now, knowing what I know now, as far as, having the electronic controlled stuff that we can just turn on, and kind of like your hot water heater in your house, you kind of set it and forget it, and it's there and ready to use when you are.
Showtime rotisserie.
Do you think that it scorches any compared to, like, some people you'll say it's, every time they taste something that's been ran on electric, that they taste scorch?
Well, here's my problem with that. I've had a lot of people use gas. I've had a lot of people use you had one guy that done it on wood. And it seems like nowadays, anytime you're actually having the issue with scorching, probably I'd say 7 out of 10 times, it's going to be because people are filling the stills up at nighttime.
No matter everything's settled.
No matter how well they strain it, there's always going to be sediment in it. And if you let that stuff settle overnight, of course, if you're running an electric element, there's going to be a little bit settle on that element that's going to definitely scorch as soon as you plug that thing up. Mm-hmm. Kind of my key to that whole thing is that if I do pump over at nighttime before I fire up the next day, you can bet I'm in there stirring it. I stir it up real good. I light it and I stir it again. I'll stir it for 5 or 10 minutes to get everything kind of moving while it's getting hot. And that's kind of the cool thing about these, as far as what I was talking about doing the whitewash. If you're doing it right, you're letting it settle. Because see, when I do mine after fermentation, it's at least 2 to 3 weeks before I'll even think about pumping it over and running it. Just because I like to let all that yeast settle as much as possible.
Yeah, I think we had a conversation about that probably a year or so ago with the yeast, and I'm like, "What the hell?" And you're like, "You gotta let it sit. Just let it sit."
Yep, just let it sit, let it rest. And kind of the cool thing about I've learned over the last year, I'm not really ever been real big on doing like corn. But I have learned that doing off the grain corn is so much more efficient, and I like it as far as the flavor is so much better.
Off the grain?
Off the grain, absolutely,
Really?
absolutely.
Huh.
And the thing about it is, people talk about it all the time as far as like, oh, I like to leave my corn in, my corn in the mash just so that it can actually give me more flavor and I get more out of it. And of course, the sour mash is kind of a whole different ball game.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing a corn mash, and you're making the conversions like you're supposed to be, heating it up, putting your enzyme in it, using your alpha and your beta enzymes, converting all those corn starches into corn sugars. What purpose is there to leave the grain in there? I mean, there's really no purpose in leaving it in. If you're making all the conversion, you're converting all the corn starch into a corn sugar. Why not get it out of there? Why not get the grain? Get the Why not get the grain out of the mash? And let it actually have time to do its thing.
Makes sense. She probably just flashed him if I had to bet.
Yep.
She's telling him, like, you've been on long enough. It's time to get off. Them two Ohio boys.
But no, seriously though, as far as off the grain, I feel like that making that conversions, getting all that corn starch converted to corn sugars, and then letting the corn sugar, actually ferment off like it's supposed to. One of the biggest things, and I know both of you have probably ran corn, have you not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you make a corn mash and after fermentation, what's the very first thing that you do?
I move into a secondary and let it sit so it settles again. I'm a secondary guy. Okay. So as soon as I go right into a secondary and let it sit for 3 to 7 days.
But are you pumping it off?
Yeah, I pump it in there and stay up out of the yeast bed on the bottom. And then so it goes, I drop my pump in and I pump it into a secondary and I stay up out of the bottom. Okay. And then I let it sit in that secondary until it clears up a little bit more, and you still get a nice layer in the bottom, and then I pump it into the still.
Okay, Sean, about you?
Well, I don't do a secondary. I just throw a bag over the pot and just pump it right in.
Okay, so you're just pumping it right out of the bucket.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with that being said, where is all your yeast and everything going? The one thing that you want out of your mash, you want that completely, as much out of your mash as you can get.
In theory, it's in the bottom of the barrel.
Mm-hmm.
In theory,
right.
But what you're getting at is it's making its way to the still.
Right. So
it does. Yeah.
Here's what I'm really getting at. Most people I've ever seen that do it, of course, they're dipping it out. They're putting it in some kind of cheesecloth, whatever. They're squeezing it. They're straining all that. They're just pulling all the grain and everything out. They're squeezing it out. Get it all as clean as they can possibly get it. But what I don't feel like the people are actually doing is they're not really realizing when they stir all this stuff back up and they're straining, all they're doing is they're squeezing all that yeast, all that nasty sediment. They're squeezing it right into their pot.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever they heat this thing up and they cook all that, where's all that going? It's going right into their liquor.
Right into the pot.
Yangy, yeasty taste is going right into their liquor.
Yep.
So if you can just eliminate that step completely, actually getting rid of all the grain, getting rid of all the major part of the sediment in the beginning, why would you not do that?
I mean, you see, most beers are fermented. They don't leave the grains in. I mean, it makes sense.
Yep.
Yep.
And I know both have actually watched old George.
On YouTube, George?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing I was listening to him one night, one thing he said that made the most perfect sense to me, bar none, hands down, is the cleaner it goes in, the cleaner it comes out. I mean, it's just, that whole theory that's something I've always thought about, but never really thought about it in that way, It's so, that's kind of where I have always felt like, if you can ferment off the grain, because all you're wanting is the flavor, and you're looking for the corn sugar for your
Mm-hmm.
actual alcohol quantity. But if you're making that conversion, you're getting the flavor anyway.
Right.
Make it easier on yourself in the end.
Exactly.
So when you do corn or grain in general, are you more of like a corn sugar, like a dextrose guy, or a white sugar?
Well,
Or do you add any sugar? You just convert all of it and you run with what you get.
well, basically, I mean, I like to, as far as like doing a true whiskey. Anytime I do a corn, I want to try to do it more as a true whiskey. You know, of course, whiskey don't have any sugar in it whatsoever. If I'm going to do it for where I want to try to get the quantity I can out of it, to make it kind of worth the while, then I'll actually work by gravity, and whatever I get out of the corn, then I'll make up the difference, to get my, normally I try to shoot for the 1.080 mark or around the 10%. And then, of course, we know that, 1 pound of sugar, 1 gallon of water gives you about 30 to 32 gravity points. So, you kind of work it from there. So, and if you're sitting on about 50 and you need 30, then it's 1 pound per gallon. If you end up with something like, I don't know, say for instance, we ended up with about 20, then of course I had to put 2 pounds per gallon just to get those points where I'd want for my quantity. But if I'm shooting more just for the quality of the corn whiskey, then I'll just let it go from where it goes. But, if I end up with 6-7%, then 6-7% of good corn whiskey is where I'll be.
Yeah.
It's a good flavor out of that.
Oh, absolutely.
That's for sure.
So what's your favorite type of brandy?
Well, I've always done for quite a few years is actually banana. I like a banana brandy. For whatever reason, I don't know. I've done corn, not corn. I'm sorry. I've done apples, and I've done grapes. I've done strawberries. I've done several different kinds of apples. Being used to live right in an apple orchard, I had plenty of apples and could experiment many different ways. But bananas, for some reason, have always been my go-to thing. You get them at the grocery store really cheap. It don't take a lot of them. And I found whenever I do my charring process, it just enhances such a much better flavor. It's just so smooth. But me and Kara done one back in when did we actually do that? End of last year?
Huh?
The brandy.
Which one?
The pineapple banana.
Jerry's talking straight to my heart. He's over here talking about banana brandy.
We ran that one in
It's like he did his research before he came on.
the pineapple banana we ran in April.
Yeah, so we actually done early this year we actually done a banana and pineapple brandy. I'd actually had some pineapples left over on something we done for the show last year, and they had bought a bunch of pineapples, and of course we had probably 6 or 8 pineapples, and they were just the sugar content, using the
I think it was
the fractometer. I think it was about 19% sugar.
no, that one of them we had was almost 25.
Yeah, so the pineapples was really, really sweet.
Nice.
So I told her, I said, let's just chop these things up. Let's just do a banana pineapple, and it turned out really, really good. And we done about an 8-week char on it, and the whole process usually takes me about 8 weeks. The actual char about 6 weeks, and then I usually do a 2-week process of racking to like filter. I'm not real big on trying to filter my brandies through, through a cheesecloth or coffee or something like that. I like to actually let gravity, let nature take its course. Just let it set the jars, let everything settle, pull off the top into another carboy, let it settle, pull off the top again, and that process takes about 2 weeks. So overall, it's about an 8-week process, and it's really so smooth. I mean, we've had people tell us that like Maker's Mark and Crown Royal stuff like that don't even hold a candle to it.
Well, see, that's just it. All them big companies, man. It's the love and the spirit ain't there.
That's
Master.
right,
You
man.
know, you get to the small batch again, like we were talking about earlier. That's where it's at.
And I think we done what 8 gallons, 6 or 8 gallons on our last go around that we actually charred, and I mean you can taste every bit of the love that's put into it.
Hell yeah,
That's what makes it the best, man. It's that love, It's that
absolutely.
little bit of love, and all the time you put in perfecting it and getting it right and messing up over the years. All that makes a big difference, man. That's the tears. That's the tears part.
And that's what I tell a lot of people. People ask me, it's like, what's in this? I say usually about 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, like, what's in that? A lot of me is in that. It's got a lot of me in it, and so enjoy it because.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like a lot of people who've been in this for quite some time. They can tell you a lot of things they've done wrong, and a lot of things they don't remember how they done. That was one of my big things too. And one of the things that I try to always recommend to people, especially new people getting into this. So anybody that's watching this, please take this to the fullest advantage. But as you're getting started into this into this hobby or tradition, or whatever you're going to call it, as you start out, take the time to write things down. I don't care what it is. When I first started, I actually would write down the date, the date, of course, the time of year it was, what the temperature was, whether it was hot, whether it was rainy. I would write down all those kind of memos just for the fact that if I done it different one day versus the next. So like today it was raining, the next time I done it was sunshining. And then when it was sunshine, it turned out better than I thought to do it when it's hot, So a lot of those things, most people don't have to go that technical with it, but just write stuff down. Good, bad, different, whether it turns out good, whether it turns out bad. Write it all down. Write it down that you made this, you tried this, it didn't work, you didn't get nothing out of it, or you got very little out of it. Write it down. That way you know. And you make a little slight modification down. You write that modification down so that you can see the difference in what happens. That's really the best way that I know that people can really learn, themselves and understand what's going on. I can give you a recipe and tell you how to do it, but whether you actually do it the exact same way that I do it and follow that process is going to be one thing. And even if you did, it may not work best for you. But keeping a good memo of everything I have found over the years has been just a lifesaver for me. And, because there's things that I've done that I've really messed up really bad on it. And had I not wrote that down for the next time, I wouldn't have did what I've done wrong.
Yeah, the smallest change makes the biggest difference,
And it really does. Whether it be water, whether it be your gas setting or your fire or whatever, it all makes a big difference.
It's like making fudge, man. The humidity, the barometric pressure, everything makes such a difference, and it's never going to come out the same twice. Like no matter how many times you run that still, it's never going to be the same twice. It's always something a little different.
And I can tell you a good example of that is my mom and dad used to make this. I can't remember exactly what they call it. Some people might know exactly what I'm talking about. But my mom would always make like a cake, just make a bigger old cake, yellow cake. And they take a straw and poke holes on that cake. And then they made this chocolate icing. And it had to be done in such a way that was so particular that it had to be put together. It had to be cooked. And it had to be you had to sit there and stir it while it got hot. If you stop stirring that thing for 1 minute, that chocolate icing would not turn out right whatsoever. It's almost like making fudge.
Yeah.
But it's like they would stir it and stir it. I've heard my dad sit there just complain, drop about having to stir that chocolate long. But he would. One time he actually stopped. Didn't stir it quite as much, and the buzzer went off on the cake, and it never hardened. It never got hard. It actually just stayed a liquefied chocolate syrup, pretty much, on this cake. But had he kept stirring it like he's supposed to, it would have actually got on the cake, and it actually hardened up almost like a fudge on the cake.
Nice. Now I want some fudge cake, man. Thanks, Jerry. Don't take much to push me over the edge.
Hell no.
What kind of yeast do you use, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, believe it or not, basically what I use is a turbo yeast. I've always used the turbo yeast. I've always, it's always worked great for me. One of the things that I've had most people complain about is turbo yeast, and it's like one of the. I think Sean, even there years ago, used to cuss turbo yeast all the time, and still may. I don't know, but one of the things that I tell people that really makes a difference with turbo yeast is you have got to let it settle. There's the diammonium phosphate that's in it. There's several ingredients that's in it. There's yeast nutrient and all that stuff that's in there. You have got to once that's worked off. Most people, especially getting into it, they just want to get the yeast pitched, let it ferment, and then they're ready to run it.
Yep.
Which is the biggest mistake I find with a lot of people coming into this hobby.
A lot
is people they don't have any patience for it.
Yeah. When people think like, all right, well, everybody says my mash should be done in 5 to 10 days, and it's like, look, man, your mash is done when it's settled and it's clear and it's ready to go. If it takes a month, it takes a month. Like put your weighting britches on,
and it says it's done. It's done.
Yeah,
but usually for me, that's once that Brix meter says it's ready and it's done, that's the halfway point for me. That's about when it's half done. Then I'll cover it up and let it sit for at least another week or two. I want to be able to go in there, and also especially with pretty much with any mash, but especially with a turbo, degasification is one thing that I really am really strong about. If you don't degas after fermentation, it could take months and months for that stuff to ever settle. But if you'll transfer it to another barrel, or you'll actually stir it up real good, take you a paddle beater and put it on a drill and really beat that stuff up really good. Because what people don't realize is that yeast is actually working. It's floating around in there. Of course, everything the yeast is actually putting out carbon dioxide, which is a bubble. So any of that fragmentation that gets hung in a bubble, it's going to be suspended enough to where it's heavy enough it's not going to come to the top, and it's light enough it's not going to go to the bottom. It's kind of suspended. So if you don't degas, break all them bubbles down to where all that stuff can settle and all your gas can come out, it's never going to clear up. But 99% of the time, about 3 days after it says it's done, I'll get in there with my paddle or my drill, and I'll really hit that stuff really good. And then usually within 5 to 10 days, it's clear as water, and that's when I know it's ready to pump over and run.
It's kind of what I achieved by pumping into a secondary, pump off the top above that yeast bed, about an inch or two above it. Stop and then let it sit in there for about a week and let it settle again. And so it's a good tip, man.
That's like perfect. You said, I was one of them people. I didn't know. I mean, you just don't know. And if you don't know, well, then you just beat the hell out of it. Like, fuck turbo yeast. I mean, if you don't know, you don't know.
Right.
But I feel like that's definitely a good way of doing it. I have actually since done it.
I was going to say, you just used some turbo yeast, right? Now you just used some turbo yeast not too long ago, if I remember.
So. Yeah, and same situation. I think it sat for like 3 or 4 weeks, and but yeah,
good and clear, man. You
can
definitely
tell. One of the
difference.
things about turbo yeast that I have a lot of questions about is people ask me is like you have 24-hour turbo yeast, you have 48-hour turbo yeast. And basically, people can't really think that they can put a certain amount of yeast in there. It's going to make it work twice as fast. I mean, yeast can only work at one speed. I think with what's the 24 and the 48, it's more about the amount of these yeast nutrient and the other like the diammonium phosphate that's in it. And there's one other thing I can't think of it off the top of my head that basically make up the turbo yeast. But it's basically the yeast nutrient and diammonium phosphate makes up the difference. And I tell people all the time, don't be afraid to kind of I found what works good for me, but a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people like the 24 by itself. A lot of people like the 48 by itself. Some people kind of mix it up a little bit, kind of put a little bit of one versus a little bit of the other. And I've actually done experiments throughout the years as to what I use, and I've tried doing like the 24 by itself. I've tried doing the 48 by itself. I've tried doing a little bit of a mix up of them, and I've kind of found what works for me. I'm actually getting about probably an 8 to 10% better yield doing it the way I do it versus just doing one or the other. So don't be afraid, as far as that kind of stuff goes and experimenting, everybody thinks that you can overpitch. You can overpitch yeast, in my opinion, because if you put too much yeast in there and your mash works off, you're really not doing anything other than just throwing extra tainted flavor in there. And if you underpitch one, you can underpitch it to a degree. It doesn't really matter. You can put yeast in a barrel, and your mash will work off eventually. It may take it 6 months to a year to work off, but it will. It will work off.
Yep.
It's kind of finding that fine line to where depending on how much sugar you use or what you're doing as far as fruits or anything like that. As far as corn, of course, corn I wouldn't use it wouldn't use turbo out of corn. It just ain't designed for it. But if you're there is the right amount or the suggested amount that actually work off the amount of sugars that you're actually using.
Right. Oh, yeah. And a lot of people, man, they swear by daddy or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm doing grain, I usually just use normal bread yeast. Yeah. But whatever works best for you, that's, in my opinion, the best thing to do.
And that's just it. There's so many different strains of yeast that's just unreal. But and I tell people all the time, don't be afraid to mix it up. You try using half regular bread yeast and half daddy. It's you can't ever be afraid to mix that up. Because like I say, depending on what you're doing, actually have a combination of two might be better for you because one strain may be able to work certain parts of your mash, and the other strain may work the other part better. Having that combination, it's like it's kind of like I like using a lot of what do you call those things I like to use? Or use examples of all the time. It's not a metaphor, but what I'm trying to say is like it's like if you took like say all of one type generational of people to per se on a job site, and if you had like all younger kids on a job site, chances are you're probably not going to get as much accomplished as what you would if you had like say a mix of like older generation, mid generation, and younger.
Like a melting pot.
Yeah, I mean, because you've actually got you need the experience of the older guys. You need the kind of
the backs of the younger guys.
backs of the guys. The middle guys kind of keep the middle generation kind of keep everything rolling.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's good to have a mix of different things to make things work properly. And like yeast is really no different. I use that a lot especially like with yeast. People don't really comprehend the whole gravity percentage of water in your mash. But I have a lot of people ask me, it's like, how can you not, you got 55 gallons of water there, how do you not have enough liquid or how do you not have enough water in that barrel for the yeast to work off? And my example of that is like, okay, if I give you a pack of saltine crackers, a whole sleeve of saltine crackers, and I give you a quart jar, chances are you're going to be able to eat that whole sleeve of saltine crackers with a quart jar of water. And I give you a little bit, I give you that same sleeve of crackers, and I give you, I don't know, say a shot glass full of water. Chances are you're going to get about halfway through that sleeve of crackers, and you're not going to be able to eat anymore. You're going to have to take a break. You're going to have to quit eating and just kind of sit back and rest. Yeast is the same way. If they don't have enough water, they can't eat all that yeast. So
you got to wash that food down.
Yeah, that's why it's so important with the gravity you know, you don't average much over about 5 over the one. It's because you don't want to really get over much over about that 12% mark. Most people say, well, if you get over that, you're creating jet fuel or whatever. It's like, no, you just got a higher percentage, a higher ABV of alcohol. Or what your potential ABV would be. If you shoot around that 10% mark or that 11% mark, that guarantees you that your ratio between your water and your yeast are going to be equal enough for the job to be completed.
Nice.
Yep. Hell yeah.
Man, this is cool, man. We appreciate you coming on, Jerry.
Yeah. My pleasure.
We've been on here over an hour. I think we're coming to the end. I mean, honestly, I could sit here and listen to you talk all night, man. This is a treat for me. Like, this is a treat for me. Hold on, let me be starstruck for a minute.
Yeah, me too. He's Hollywood.
All right, I'm done being starstruck. But anyways, it was an honor to meet you, Jerry. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine.
And I said we're real grateful to have you on and taking the time out and just to sit here and shoot the shit with us and listen to you talk. And for me, this was more. I wanted to hear your backstory because you don't get a whole lot of your backstory from the show. And
right.
So for me, I was I'm real honored to hear your backstory and how you came up and working on a 10-gallon pot and going back to the 5-gallon. And honestly, Sean should probably go back to a 5-gallon pot and learn how to ferment in 5-gallon buckets because his ass can't ferment in a 5-gallon bucket to save his life. So.
That's what you're for. I don't need to do that anymore.
What the hell am I going to fill with a 5-gallon bucket, man? Like a 5-gallon bucket don't make enough wine, so let alone enough fill still. So,
well, one thing you asked about earlier, as far as like my backstory, as far as the moonshine part of it goes. But one of the things that people I think are most intrigued with the show, and something I've tried to really put out there, is like my background in I guess you'd say backwoods engineering and the things that I like to build. I've always been a tinkerer, and I've always had the desire to build things. I've got this kind of mindset where, if you get to explaining something to me, and especially if you can jot it down on paper where I can actually physically see what you're talking about, in my mind, I've already got it built. Nice. So me already knowing exactly how it should work or how I'm going to build it, therefore I know what I'm going to need to build it with. And as you see coming up on the show this season, we actually do build a new steel, which I think they've done showed it. But hopefully they'll get us in the shop and be more detailed on what it is we're actually doing with what we've built. But all I'll say is, like, in building this process, I actually built the whole entire steel around 2 barrel bands. Like 2 bands that go on a barrel to hold lids on. I had to design the steel and built the whole steel around these 2 bands, and you'll get to see why and how. But just keep in mind when you see it, that those bands that are on the steel, that I actually had to design the whole entire steel around those bands so that they could do what they do.
Nice. I'm excited for that.
That's cool. Yeah, I can't wait to check it out.
But yeah, it's just my building skills is like one of the things that I've always just kind of been a I won't say an engineer, because I guess I think a little bit further through than an engineer would sometimes, but
I've seen some engineers make some things that make you scratch your head, like, why? An engineer made that. So
you can tell the difference who's designed something that somebody else can come in and work on. Versus, like some of the cars today that is engineered where you got to pull the whole rear end out just to change the spark plug. It's one of them crazy things. Like
you can definitely tell when somebody engineers it for themselves. Like, I'm making this for me to use. It's going to be easier to use. It's going to be usable. It's simple to use. So,
well, it's like years ago. Me and a bunch of guys, we used to go hunting all the time, and so we always had this issue of, like, we're always worried about getting somewhere, something happening to one of our bows, and we wouldn't be able to fix it if we had to, and so then we was worried about if we shot a deer, trying to be able to have a place to, hang it up and skin it. So I actually designed a whole bow press / beer crane / there was something else I actually put in all that mix, but I ended up doing 3 different things, and all it does is it went in the receiver hitch of a car or a truck or a motorhome or whatever, and it's just way you can convert it around and do these multiple things with it,
Nice.
all at one time. But the winch that I actually used to actually crank the deer up with was the same winch that I was actually used to put a strap around the bow where I could pull it down in the bow press to be able to change the string on it.
Hey,
Yeah.
necessity's the mother of ingenuity, but
That's exactly right.
looks like Sean's got a visitor. Sean's night's over. He's on baby duty now. So hope everybody has a good night. Thanks again, Jerry. Like I said, it was an honor to meet you, and it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to meeting you in person one day. I'm sure it's going to happen soon. So,
absolutely.
But anyways, thanks everybody for listening. Sean, have a great night. Jerry, have a great night. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. And we'll see you guys next Sunday. Everybody shine on.